Okay, so I wanted to start off with that selection of images. You may have noticed that what they were is they were family photographs where someone had gone back to the location that the original image had been taken and juxtaposed that moment in time with current time. And the reason that I selected that is because it's Thanksgiving. Probably this year, a lot of people aren't going to be going home as we did in the past. But Thanksgiving is a time of year that really brings up that experience for a lot of us of going home. And when we go home, we're sort of instantly transported to both the present moment juxtaposed against our past. You may not know it, but here at Seattle Atheist Church, November is the month that we have selected to focus on communication. Communication is one of the most important things that we can learn about. And so on our Wheel of the Year, we've dedicated November to being a month to especially learning about how to be better communicators. And to do that, we just finished up with book club a book called Crucial Conversations. So how to talk when the stakes are high. And Eckhart Tolle once said that if you ever start thinking you've reached enlightenment, just go spend a week with your family. And you will find that things will come up. Maybe you will be triggered, whatever. So the book Crucial Conversations has a lot of information in it about how to do conversations better. And I'm not going to be able to cover it all in the short period of time that we have, but I'll cover some of it. And then we can, in the conversation that we have after church, there are a lot of people who've read the book. They might have something that was meaningful to them that they want to share. But the first thing that is really important to know about having crucial conversations is you will almost never sit down with someone and then by the end of the conversation, they will have agreed with you. In fact, what happens for most people is when they start talking about something and there's a disagreement, is people tend to dig in and double down. So it can be really infuriating or frustrating or whatever, because you feel like, oh my goodness, we started talking about this. This person is just not listening. In fact, the conversation seems to be getting crazier and crazier as they sort of double down on their beliefs. So you just shouldn't expect that someone in one conversation is going to suddenly start agreeing with you. And as soon as you see that somebody is just really digging in on whatever it is that the two of you are arguing about, you need to be able to just sort of step back in that moment and kind of let it go in that moment, because it's really counterproductive to try to fight or disagree when somebody's just digging in on their position. But at the same time, you don't want to be afraid to have hard conversations. There are two ways that people fail at having difficult conversations. And one way is there's actually three ways, but two of them happen when you actually have the conversation. So one of those is a way that we all recognize, right? Somebody gets upset, they might blow up, and we'll talk later about all the different things that somebody does when they're trying to control a conversation that way. Or if they just have the personality that sort of is going to react that way when they feel unsafe or unheard in a conversation. The other thing that people do when they feel that they need to control something about a conversation because they don't feel like they're being heard or they're not getting their way is that some people with a certain style of communication withdraw from the conversation. They stop, being willing to share what they know, or sometimes they might even leave the space where the conversation is happening. And this is called silence and violence, but to me, they're both kinds of violence, if you want to call it that. They're both ways of trying to control the conversation and stop the conversation from happening. The third way that people fail at crucial conversations is they just don't ever have them at all. So if you're too afraid to have the conversation and the conversation never happens, in some sense, that's a conversational fail as well. Why do people withdraw and avoid having difficult conversations? So if you think about yourself and maybe even around the family dinner table, maybe certain topics are taboo, and you know that you're not supposed to talk about those things. And the reason that a lot of people withdraw from a conversation, again, remember, blowing up, yelling, all of that, that's also a way to kind of shut down the conversation. But there's lots of different ways that we shut down the conversation. Why do people do it? And they do it because they feel unsafe during the conversation. So it does require bravery to have a crucial conversation, and it requires a lot of maturity to be able to stay in a crucial conversation. So let's talk about how we can make the conversation safe, both for ourselves and for other people, so that we can have these conversations. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to notice what is happening in our body. So just pay attention to your own body. Your body will tell you when things have started to feel unsafe to you. So it might be that your heart rate quickens. It might be that your palms get sweaty. It might be that your throat feels constricted. And when something happens in your body, that is your cue that you should take a moment and just really breathe and kind of be with your body and very much unhook from telling yourself a story about the other person. Okay. If you want to be responsible for yourself in the conversation, you need to stay with your own body, how you are responding, breathe, and then think about what story you are telling yourself that is causing you to get upset. Now, the word story is very controversial, and I want to emphasize the story may be true or it may be false, but at this point, we're not analyzing whether your analysis of the situation is true or false. We're just saying there is something in your mind and you're feeling afraid in your body. So you want to change what's in your mind, hopefully as part of getting control of what's happening in your body. So the first thing you do is you start with heart. Think about what you really want out of this conversation. And if you're at home and you're having this conversation with family, it probably has something to do with you want to be connected to these people. So you might even want to just be like, hey, let's not talk about politics because we're just going to disagree. Or I mean, someone in the Crucial Conversations book group suggested that can you just let the person talk and realize that's their opinion and those are their thoughts. And if you care about the person, you can just listen and just let them express whatever it is that they want to express, okay, in the moment, because you're starting with heart that you want more for the relationship to continue than to win a particular argument. Okay, so you start with heart. But then you also notice if you are playing some games of there's a lot of terminology, as psychologists like to use a lot of terminology. But the idea is like, am I telling a story where this other person is a villain and I am either helpless or a victim? And, when you start making up a story about what the other person is doing, I want you to stop. The authors want you to stop and ask yourself, why would a reasonable person be saying these things or thinking these things? And even if you kind of know that this particular family member, whomever it may be, is actually not a reasonable person, to the extent that you are in this conversation with them in this moment, you want to treat them like they are a reasonable person and really listen to what they are saying and ask yourself, why would they be saying that? So let me take a moment because I've lost my, you are listening for why are they saying that? Yeah. And you are just really listening, because a big problem that happens in conversations is we get so busy defending ourselves or making our next point that we don't really let the other person feel heard. And that's a very important part of a conversation, is making sure that the other person feels heard. If you want to focus on what you really want for the relationship, so that conversation needs to be considered in terms of what you really want in the relationship beyond just simply winning a particular argument. Okay. So I had mentioned before that there are different patterns people use when they communicate, and you can learn to recognize yours. So on the one hand, there's silence, and then there's also what he calls violence. So I would like to acknowledge that the violent hopefully is not violent. There's never any reason to result to actual violence. Name calling is violence, threats of violence, and violence, actual physical violence. And I'd like to point out that the silence is as violent as what they call violent, right? Just two sides of the same coin for trying to control the outcome of a conversation. So if you have a kind of blow up style, you might be a person who raises their voice, who starts repeating themselves, refuses, becomes hyperbolic. And if you were a person who uses silence, you may withdraw, physically withdrawing, turning away, refusing to answer questions, refusing to say things that you know. So both of those things are really bad. When you notice that you're starting one of your patterns, the thing is if you commit to this, then you will discover what your pattern is if you don't already know it. And when you notice that you are doing it, possibly in that moment, you can say, hey, I notice that I'm doing this and I want to recommit to having this conversation. You can take a break from the conversation until you feel calm enough to come back to the conversation. But what the very small thing from this book that I am talking about today, like I say, there's like 20 different interesting, helpful things that you could get out of this book. But what I really am trying to communicate about today is this idea of catching yourself when you're in the middle of sort of tanking a conversation and getting it back on track. And the more you commit to that, you will actually sort of begin to notice your own patterns. You'll begin to notice what's happening in your own body. Some of us are really disconnected. We feel a feeling and we go straight to our reaction instead of being able to just sit with that and try to breathe and try to control our body responses so that we can be in the conversation. And you'll be doing that so that you're coming up, you're going to focus on rebuilding safety for the other person so that the conversation can happen. But if we believe that the other person is a villain and we're a victim, we believe we're a victim, we automatically believe that they're a villain. And if you start doing victim villain thinking, it's really counterproductive. So you need to ask yourself, why would a reasonable person behave the way they're behaving and say the things that they're saying? Rather than assign the worst possible motives, I want you to look for the best possible motives for the person that you're having the conversation with. Now, this process of listening to the other person and trying to understand where they're coming from actually takes time. In the book, there's a concept called the pool of shared meaning. So imagine a metaphorical pool into which we are all pouring our meanings. So what does it mean? It's your concepts, the definitions, or the way you are using specific words, because you're really coming from the opposite side of the aisle from the person that you're talking to. You may not even really have a shared vocabulary. So you want to make sure that you're really talking about like how you arrived at the conclusions that you arrived at. And when you do this, you're talking about sort of like what you are thinking, and it's much less adversarial than really trying to change what the other person is thinking. Just explore, like, this is what I know, this is what I think, and give them space to do the same. And if you can do that respectfully with a lot of listening as much as defending your own position, then hopefully the conversations can go better. Just allow time for people to know where you're coming from and to know that you know where they're coming from. The other thing that I hope you will do if you have a very adversarial relationship and really disagree with a lot of the positions of the people that you might be spending time with around the holidays is choose a shared mutual purpose that is not about arguing. What makes it meaningful? Why are you coming to spend time with these people? And if it's about tradition, if it's about family, then I urge you to consciously create that experience for yourself. So, watch the old 8mm films of your grandparents, prepare the traditional recipes, and find positive things to connect about. It's okay sometimes to say, there's a time and a place to have a conversation. And if you know that it's going to just blow everything up, maybe the time and place, you can have it in little spoonfuls. Again, don't be afraid to have a difficult conversation, but at the same time, consider first what is your real purpose and start with heart. Okay. Hopefully we will. I also want to just say, I've had this conversation before. I've had this talk before, and each time I've given this talk, it's slightly different. I put into our, I don't even know what that thing is called. Discord server links to when this talk was given in the past. And also, I was challenged on the idea that when you have a conversation with people and you disagree with them, they sort of double down, and it can be counterproductive to keep pushing. And Eva talked about that a bit in one of her talks. And I also have a link to that I'll share with you guys if you want to see that talk. So anyway, looking forward to the conversation.